resuming recording and resuming stream. And it should be back up here in a second. Okay. So again, we're going to read just the preface of The Functions of Role-Playing Games, How Participants Create Community, Solve Problems, and Explore Identity by Professor Lynne Bowman out of Texas. And we're just going to cover the preface here, which kind of gives and maybe some of the intro. And then we're going to cover Robin's laws of good game mastering. The present work explores the various social and psychological functions of role-playing with a specific emphasis on role-playing games. The activity of role-playing finds its roots in essential aspects of human social behavior, including childhood pretend play, storytelling, and ritual. The subcultural practice of role-playing games emerged from these age-old practices, but also from several cultural shifts inherent to American life in the latter half of the 20th century. These shifts include culture-wide paradigm shifts regarding diversity, religion, and alternative lifestyles, an increased interest in the genres of fantasy, science fiction, and horror, a heightened sense of cynicism and self-awareness characteristic of Generation X, and the large-scale technological advances characteristic of the computer and information age. While these cultural shifts specifically contributed to the popularity of role-playing games as a subculture, people also engage in the practice of role-playing in a variety of different contexts, including business, education, military training, improvisational theater, drama therapy, healthcare, and leisure. The practice of role-playing offers three basic functions. First, role-playing enhances a group's sense of communal cohesiveness by providing narrative enactment within a ritual framework. So I'm going to read that again. So role-playing enhances a group's sense of communal cohesiveness by providing narrative enactment within a ritual framework. And she goes on at length about ritual. Second, role-playing encourages complex problem solving and provides participants with the opportunity to learn an extensive array of skills through the enactment of scenarios. We've discussed that, quite a bit. Third, role-playing offers participants a safe space to enact alternative personas through a process known as identity alteration. This volume explores these three concepts with regard to the various forms of role-playing. The study also offers a detailed participant observer ethnography on role-playing games. This ethnography involves extensive qualitative interviews. I have personally participated in various forms of role-playing for 15 years, and this is as of 2010, including tabletop, live-action role-playing, LARP, and virtual gaming. The ethnographic chapters of this study incorporate the contributions of 19 participants, including myself. Most interviews were conducted in person and ranged between 30 minutes and 2.5 hours. 6 of the respondents, however, replied to the questions via email attachment. These responses resulted in several rounds of follow-up questions and answers, which were appended to the original interviews. So her cast of players was 19 people. Alex was a 20-year-old psychology major. Carly, an 18-year-old office manager. Chris, a 25-year-old web designer, technical manager, and sales engineer. Darren, a 28-year-old military propagandist. Interesting title. Desiree, a 36-year-old day spa owner and masseuse. Elton, in quotes, a 29-year-old fiber network field technician and business owner. Aaron, a 21-year-old retailer and college student. Guillermo, a 28-year-old operations category specialist. What is operations category specialist? Anybody have any idea what that means? Haley, a 25-year-old compliance specialist in a market security firm. Henry, a 22-year-old college student. John, a 30-year-old sales representative. Josh S., a 22-year-old chemistry major with a biology and physics minor. Hey, Eric, you might relate a little bit to that, huh? Yeah. Josh T., a 24-year-old retailer and college student. Kevin, a 46-year-old retailer. Kirsten, a 26-year-old vocal music director. Matthew, a 23-year-old apparel associate and sales consultant. Omega, I'm assuming that's an alias, a 28-year-old customer service representative, Sarah, a 29-year-old arts and humanities doctoral candidate, and Walter, a 31-year-old history and paralegal major. Now, it looks like what the oldest was 46. So the oldest in there was 46, which is interesting to note. And then the youngest is 18, so 18 to 46 for her sample there. And, of course, N being 19 for the sample size. One respondent, Elton, did not wish for his real name to be used. So, Chapter 1 covers the historical evolution and cultural permutations and establishes a framework for understanding the development of role-playing games, RPGs, as a cultural phenomenon. First, the essential roots of role-playing are explained as a ritual form of archetypal enactment and storytelling. Next, the cultural shifts that contributed to the development of role-playing games as a subculture are detailed, and we've covered that in a lot of my lectures. The 60s brought a paradigm shift toward greater acceptance of diversity and experimentation with alternative lifestyles. In addition, the publication of J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings in paperback in 1965 increased people's interest in the fantasy genre and medieval reenactment societies. As a result, a group of wargaming enthusiasts utilized concepts from Tolkien's work to create the first official role-playing game in what year, everybody? 1974, yes. Yes, yeah, because remember, it's on the quiz. With Dungeons & Dragons. Though many companies attempted to rival D&D in the next 20 years, the publication of White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade in 1991, and also, Omar, that's another reason why I was reading this, is a lot of what you're researching is also referenced in this book as well. So you both might want to get yourselves a copy. It's not expensive on Amazon. It's a good resource for both of your topics. So White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade 1991 signaled the first major thematic shift genre-wise in the history of role-playing games. I would argue that. The games in White Wolf's World of Darkness encouraged players to challenge their paradigms of reality, morality, and community, fueled by the larger cultural concerns held by members of Generation X. I wouldn't argue that part. I would just argue that it was the first major thematic shift genre-wise. That part I would argue. I think there were some others, but that's okay. Advances in video game technology offered additional platforms for RPGs to manifest. Virtual role-playing now exceeds in-person role-playing due to popular games such as World of Warcraft. Chapter 1 concludes with the delineation of types of RPGs, including tabletop games, LARP, and virtual role-playing. So, well worth going over that. And I'll have some notes about that where she and I might diverge slightly, just in opinion areas. Chapter 2, Role-Playing in Communal Contexts, explains the many environments that utilize role-playing as a practice. This chapter offers a brief history of the development of improvisational drama, drama therapy, educational role-playing, and reenactment societies. The function of ritual is explained, which often involves the enactment of dramatic, archetypal concepts in order to form a greater sense of communal cohesion. The chapter concludes by suggesting that role-playing games serve as a modern-day ritual. Chapter 3, Interactional Dynamics in Role-Playing Games, begins the ethnographic section of the volume, addressing the potential for RPGs to provide a heightened sense of community. Fantasy reveals obfuscated elements of reality by encouraging people to see beyond the mundane. The enactment of roles allows for individuals to adopt a theory of mind for others and a greater sense of empathy toward them. Many of the role players in my ethnography report feelings of childhood isolation, and role-playing games provide an outlet for social interaction. RPGs encourage individuals to enact archetypes and establish social cooperation in order to achieve a particular goal. Both the content and practice of RPGs reflect a ritual type of performance, as both players and characters must establish a sense of group cohesion to succeed. And so that's getting into like forming, storming, norming, performing, and such, and other theories of group dynamics. Chapter 4, Role-Playing as Scenario Building and Problem Solving, explores the variety of different skills acquired through role-playing scenarios. These skills fall under several dimensions: personal, interpersonal, cultural, cognitive, and professional. The chapter details the variety of societal locations that utilize role-playing for training purposes, including military, governmental, educational, corporate, and healthcare applications. Chapter 5, Tactical and Social Problem Solving in Role-Playing Games, explains how role-playing games, though entertaining in nature, also offer the potential for participants to develop these aforementioned skills. The game system provides an elaborate structure that encourages gamers to evaluate the world in terms of a complex set of rules. RPGs offer extensive scenarios that involve complex puzzles, tactics, and social maneuvering. These scenarios require the players to develop problem-solving capabilities in order to succeed. This chapter utilizes ethnographic data to explicate the different challenges role-playing games present to players. Chapter 6, Role-Playing as an Alteration of Identity, examines the roots of identity alteration in which an individual creates an alternate sense of self. The section explains forms of childhood play that indicate early examples of world-building and identity shifting, including pretend play, paracosms, and imaginary friends. The chapter then explains how, even as adults, people enact a variety of different roles in daily life and further suggests that every person contains a multiplicity of identities. The theory of dissociative identity disorder, which emerges out of studies on psychological trauma, provides insight into the desire to create multiple selves. Though many of the concepts of dissociative theory are useful for understanding role-playing, ultimately the creation of multiple selves does not necessarily result from trauma. The content of these personalities often arises from current cultural symbols and inherent psychological archetypes. By way of example, the chapter details the many classes and races of Dungeons & Dragons and traces them to earlier roots in cultural history. Chapter 7, Character Evolution and Types of Identity Alteration, offers an ethnography in which individuals attempt to explain the relationship between their primary selves and their characters. The chapter describes the moment in which a character is born and how role-players develop the character concept through various character-building activities, including backstory writing, costuming, and co-creation with other role-players. This section also explains how role-playing characters evolve over time, offering 4 distinct stages of character development. The chapter then establishes a typography of role-playing characters. These types correlate less to inherent archetypes and more to the relationship between character and player. These characters also offer potential motivations for the creation of particular types of personas. The 9 types that I describe are the doppelganger self, the devoid self, the augmented self, the fragmented self, repressed self, idealized self, oppositional self, experimental self, and the taboo self. The enactment of these personas changes the role player's understanding of themselves and the world around them. Role-playing characters sometimes live on in the minds of the players long after the game has ended, and players can utilize these experiences and personas in real-world situations. The volume concludes with the thought that the benefits offered by role-playing in more traditional environments are also offered through the leisure activity of role-playing games. Though mainstream American media channels often dismiss involvement in role-playing games as escapist and potentially dangerous, role-playing encourages creativity, self-awareness, empathy, group cohesion, and out-of-the-box thinking. The role-playing game platform facilitates the development of various cognitive and social skills that remain useful in the real world. Thus, participation in role-playing games should incur a lesser amount of stigma from the larger culture. And that's what we're definitely hoping to see more of. And then we'll call that good as an introduction. But you can see that's pretty comprehensive. Again, this was, I believe, her PhD thesis, dissertation kind of pieced together. And it's riddled with typos and grammatical issues. So the editing is rough, but the content is worth discussing. And I'm pretty sure some of this she has changed her mind about. So it's a snapshot of her thinking back in 2010 with what was available at the time. But it's a great introduction. And it's, for both of your topics, she has some pretty good meaty references you can make to some specific case studies that she discusses for both your topics.
So just ask, does she go into more detail for like the things about the self and their association with the character?
Yeah, so again, those were just highlights of each chapter. She goes into great depth. That was just the preface. This is, as I said, a 180-page book, give or take. And so she goes into each of those cells and all the other things. It goes into depth throughout the book. Yeah, it's basically a 180-page dissertation with a bad editor apparently, but great content. She really, and she and I have had good dialogue over the years, and she's been very supportive, and yeah, definitely worth checking out her other content. She has more up-to-date stuff out on the web and such, and she's been a major part of the Living Games conference, and also WeirdCon Companion, which is WeirdCon's a LARP convention in LA, I think, and yeah, she flies all over the world all the time and participating in all kinds of LARPs and LARP activities around the world. She's great, so definitely a good starting point to go with there. Questions, comments, additionally?
No, sounds like a good starting research.
Mm-hmm. And again, easily available on Amazon, just under the Functions of Role-Playing Games, and Sarah Lynne Bowman. So Sarah is Sarah, Lynne is Lynne, and Bowman is Bowman, since all those could be spelled slightly differently. All right, so I had not started with you guys on Robin's Laws of Good Game Mastering yet, correct?
Yes. I don't know. I think you might have just read the introduction. I can't quite remember.
I think I mentioned it. I don't know that I
don't remember you talking about it.
Yeah, I don't think I did with you guys. I think it's just been the other groups. So let's bring you guys up to speed. The Great Immutable Ironclad Law. By the way, so let me do... okay, I'm going to go and stop and start again because this will be a different segment. So I'll be right back.